Hi, Tom. Good to see you. Welcome.
Hey, Walter, it's good to see you back, even though you're only this big, but welcome back.
Hey, downsizing. What can I tell you? So we loved your article in the winter issue of Legacy. Uh, it's something that isn't talked about enough, communication with parents.
Yes.
And honestly, we just don't, we assume everyone walks in the door with some level of ability in communication, whether it's with staff or with the public. And the truth is, especially with all the new media out there, the new technologies, it's a whole new game. And I think we're expected to be a lot more visible and accessible to the public than probably you and I were when we started out in education.
Yeah,
Um,
I would agree with that. You made 2 points, and let me come back to them both if I
yeah,
might. In the first
please.
one, absolutely. As I noted in the article, working with families has always been key to student progress. And that doesn't mean that kids don't succeed without parent support, parent involvement. We know that, but by and large, it absolutely is beneficial. Um, that's always been the case, and it's always been the case, unfortunately, that we don't particularly train teachers how to do this. As I noted in the article, I think, rarely is this talked about in undergraduate programs. Um, Tom Hoerr, led schools for 36 years, and
Yes.
I spent hundreds of hours doing teacher observations. I spent some time in teacher conferences with the idea, not that I was there because of an issue with the kid, but to really give the teacher feedback on how she was doing. But that was
Yeah.
minuscule compared. So one is the importance, but the other, I think, is we all know the world's changed. When I began teaching and when I began education, by and large, I think there was a general trust in society, if you will. Parents walked in more or less willing to say, Tom, you're the teacher. Tell me what we can do. How can we work together? Today, I think schools are a microcosm of the environment in which we live, and that erudition, that validity often isn't there. And so parents come in wondering, questioning, even when a kid's doing well. And of course,
Yes.
in today's day and age, too many kids aren't doing well. And
Right.
parents candidly often want to put the ball in our court and say, what are you doing and why aren't you doing it well? So being able to work with parents, listening to them, dealing with them is even more critical today, I think, than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. And yet I don't see much more attention being given to it.
It's so true. And I think you hit the nail on the head with something you said that it's an aha for me, but it's so obvious. It's like the nose on my face. What we define as students doing well in 2025 is so much more. I started at 85 coming out of Ohio State, and the focus was on academics. When I had meetings with parents, we were talking about academic progress and how we could support the student. We have so much more holistic and approach and expectation for students today, and as you said, a lot of it is what's going on in society. We just know that it's a very
Yep,
stressful time, and it's hard for parents to always be there for their kids, and they want schools to step up more. Um, Having your background in multiple intelligences, and I didn't mention this at the top of the interview, but Tom launched one of the nation's first multiple intelligences school, the New City School in St. Louis. You know, multiple intelligences is a framework that helps us look more holistically. And certainly Gardner talked about, the interpersonal and the intrapersonal and the existential. This is a good thing, right? That we're looking
yes,
at kids much more holistically, and but it certainly ratchets up the expectations for how we communicate about that.
totally, totally. I mean, MI, as I say, multiple intelligence theory,
Yeah,
the model is really premised on the fact when we apply it to schools that we need to begin by looking at how children learn and grow. And too often, there was a way to learn and grow in schools. And if you
right,
did that well, you were smart. See those quote signs. And if
right,
you didn't do that well, if that wasn't your intellectual profile, if you will,
right.
you had a problem. It wasn't the school's fault. And what MI theory said is, hold on, kids have different strengths. And as I always say, and I know you say too, Walter,
Yeah,
we need to teach kids how to learn how to read, write, and calculate, period. That's not negotiable. If you can't do that, you've got a problem.
yeah,
Semicolon, however, comma, What we
Yeah.
should do is begin by looking at how children learn. What is their intelligence profile, if you will? And
Yes.
so, I'm coming back to parent-teacher conferences, but in my classrooms, when you went in, we saw many more times when kids would be using art to learn, whether
Yeah.
that was going to the art museum in the fifth grade and looking at colonial portraits to understand what life was like in what is now the United States in the 17 and 1800s, whether
Yeah.
it was doing maps of the Civil War. Again, they still read, they still write, they still calculate, but they used all the MI. So I could go on and on about uses for kids of MI, but to your point, with parents, same thing happens too.
Yeah.
Parents come into schools with different backgrounds, with different, if you will, multiple intelligences profiles. Now, let me put an addition here. One of the things I think that we often forget, we ignore, and it's tragic, and I'm going to come back to MI, I'm not losing my place here, folks,
Yeah.
is that if parents themselves have not been successful at school, it's only natural that they're going to come in with some apprehension, with some trepidation. And I think too often in schools, and I've seen this, I have felt this, parents come in, if their kid's not doing well, that exacerbates it. Even if their kid's doing okay, they come in with some feelings of anxiety and insecurity because of their background. And so to me, the more we can say, how can we make that parent comfortable? For example, little bitty things like what kind of seating do we have? Most schools, parent-teacher conferences, people run late. You have comfortable seating in the hall. Do you have reading materials? You're going to talk about kids' progress. And typically the way we do that is we show work, we give numbers. What about taking a series of student work, whether it's essays, whether it's tests, whatever, blanking out the names and
Mm.
having an array in the hall where there's a continuum. So if you're a
Yeah.
parent, you can sit and you can look and you can see this is the range of student work while you're waiting for that parent-teacher conference to begin.
Yeah.
Howard Gardner would say that's using spatial intelligence.
Yeah.
Tom Hoerr would say, yep. And what I'm trying to do is help parents get meaningful information about their children. And it's not simply me talking from a position of authority. It's me sharing, here's some examples of what's happening so you can see for yourself how your kid fits vis-a-vis everybody else. Now, if people are listening to this, they may say, Tom, that sounds great, but I teach in a school with 2,000 kids. I've got 6 classes. I get all that. So what I'm not offering here is a solution by any means. What I'm offering is saying, hold on, let's step back. Let's take another look at how we communicate. Is there a way to incorporate MI? Just like we begin with children's needs to be an effective teacher, how can we begin with parents' needs to be an effective communicator?
It's so true. And you're making me flash back years, telling it myself. Um, Sitting down with my superintendent and discussing with him an issue I had with a particular office, a group that I supervised. And the first thing out of his mouth was, so let's look at this from your emotional intelligence in how you handle this. And bam, I was immediately back in my chair.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. And it was incredibly helpful because, he wasn't calling me out. He was just saying, when you think about it now, how could you have made this a better situation for those people that you needed to have these difficult conversations with? And you're spot on. We don't think about that. We're busy. We're sitting down after school or in the evening for parent-teacher conferences after a full day of teaching, and
Yep.
this is an extra consideration that hasn't been in play.
Well, good for your superintendent for raising that issue and that approach.
Yeah. Yes. Very helpful. And I think those kinds of honest conversations across the board with staff is critical. So you talk about in the article professional development around communication, and you give an example of working with a faculty. Nobody does that. It's like, this is genius. This is why wouldn't we do that? We have faculty meetings. We have time to focus on what's important. Talk to me about how that became part of your repertoire and the kind of success and breakthroughs you've seen working with faculty on something as basic as communication.
Well, in the one point with which I would quibble is you say genius, and I'm going to say, hold on, you're talking to the wrong person here. We did a lot of good things at the New City School, and
Yeah.
Tom Hoerr, uh, did a lot of good things. And one of the reasons I did a lot of good things is I listened to the people with whom I worked. the distributed intelligence. The whole group
Yeah.
was always smarter than I was. And
Yes.
so I often talk to teachers I listened. If any of my teachers are all listening to me now, I'll say, I apologize. I should have talked more and listened more. I get that. But basically, our PD evolved from what our teachers felt the need for. And
Yeah.
I involve teachers in designing. Too often, when it comes to professional development, we forget that adults are learners just like kids are. The same
Yeah.
rules should apply. When you
Yeah.
talk about what are the qualities, the integral qualities that make PD effective, well, let's back up. Start with it needs to be comfortable. You need to have good seating. You need to have some calories. It needs to be meaningful. You need to start by beginning, sorry, with giving people time to connect with one another. That needs to be there. We do that in good classrooms, and yet too often when it comes to PD, you bring everybody in, you shuffle them in, they're sitting in metal chairs in rows, and you start, and the clock ticks, and then you take a break. And we
Yeah.
wonder why we've lost them. So
Yeah.
in my place, one of the things we did is we often started our meetings by having time, just what we call it social time, connection time.
Yeah.
Today, teaching at the University of Missouri St. Louis, so I talk a lot about the importance of gratitude. I did that back then at the New City School. I wasn't as conscious of what I was doing, but we would often begin with me saying, okay, before we start the official part of the meeting, who's got something to share, what's something exciting? People would talk about some good news. And then I might say, all right, let's do this. You've got 90 seconds. Turn to one another, groups of two or three. Talk about a success you had. What happened good the last week?
Yeah.
People would turn, the buzz would evolve, and often I would have trouble getting them to stop, which was a good sign. And I
Yes.
did that because, as you know, and I don't know that it's endemic to teachers, but it certainly is endemic to the profession. I think we're very good at looking at what we didn't do as well as we wanted, what we should have done better.
Mm.
We're reluctant to talk about our successes. If I started a faculty meeting by saying, "Hey, raise your hand. Tell me something somebody did good last week," nobody's going to raise their hand. We just don't
Mm.
do that.
Yeah.
If I said, "Tell me about something frustrating you," everybody's hand goes up. So by saying, turn to your neighbors, two or three, that's small enough that everybody has to interact. Talk about something that was good. What we'll do is we'll begin to get a buzz where we celebrate and congratulate ourselves. Right now in my classes at the university, I'm talking about the role of gratitude and appreciation, and I would do that. So to
Yeah.
come back to what I talked about in the article, a number of times when I would talk with teachers, I would hear them talk either beforehand, how anxious they were about some parent-teacher conferences, not all
Yeah.
of them,
Yeah.
10%, which is a lot, or at
Yeah.
the end, how frustrating it was. Rarely did people come into me and say, boy, I had a great parent-teacher conference. Now,
Right.
parenthetically, I will add, I will often hear from parents how good the parent-teacher conferences were, even though the teachers might not have felt that way.
Yeah.
So as I talked with my administrative team, talked with teachers, we decided that we should make parent-teacher conferences a topic of professional development. I have to say here, Walter, we did that a few times. We should have done it more often. It should
Right.
have been a regular annual feature. I don't think it was. But, and this wasn't me, Tom Hoerr, standing and saying, let me tell you the 14 points of parent-teacher, no. We
Right.
did it, as I talked about, we did it as role plays. I did it, and it was fun, and sometimes I had somebody come up and their job was to be the difficult parent. We've all had that parent to see how I responded. Sometimes I did it terribly on purpose and people laughed. Sometimes I did it terribly, not on purpose. People still laughed. I tried to do it well, but the point was to make it meaningful. And by
Yeah.
my showing what maybe worked, showing what maybe didn't work, and then saying, okay, let's break up in groups of three. Let's do that. I want an observer. Each one of you do it. All of a sudden, it became interactive. We know that kids don't learn best by simply listening. They learn when they are engaged. Well, guess what? Adults
Yeah.
learn best when they're engaged too.
Yeah.
So in this situation, the focus was not simply parent-teacher conferences, parent-teacher communication, but how to engage teachers in parent-teacher conferences, parent-teacher communication.
Great examples. You had referenced time, and there's only so much time in a day. And you have a fantastic quote in the article about how we need to honor others' time and show people that we honor their time. Can you talk about that? There's such a pushback with educators, even when there's great pedagogy and learning going on, that they just don't have another minute in their day to add something else to their plate. So when we We talk about showing them that we honor their time, especially as a leader of a school. How do you do that?
Well, I think you do it a couple ways. And again, this is another example to all other folks listening and watching the show of me. I'm going to sound much better than I was. So just know that, again, if my teachers are here, they'd roll their eyes and say, Tom, why didn't you do that all the time? Um,
Right,
the first thing I think is being respectful, little bitty things by not having endless meetings, not having needless meetings, starting and ending on time. That's kind of common sense. But let me give you perhaps an even more powerful suggestion. And if your folks are listening, pull over to the side of the road because what I'm going to say in the next 3 minutes is probably the most important thing you're going to hear all day. Too often when we have meetings, is Walter suggests, we don't have enough time, we get through our agenda and we end. I would have faculty meetings that started at 3:50. We try to end at, 4:45, 4:50. And I always knew it was time to end because I could hear keys jingling and purses moving and, okay, right. So we go to the last minute and say, okay, hey, thank you, see you tomorrow. And everybody would split. I read a wonderful book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's a book that takes social science premises and he applies it to everyday life. And
mhm,
one of the distinctions he makes is between memory and experience. And
yeah,
what he notes from a very scholastic perspective is that
right,
our memory is framed by the end of the experience. I actually wrote an article about this. What
yeah,
happens last is what stays with you. Common sense, right? So
yeah,
I read that and I thought, holy cow, I have been doing my meetings all wrong. To come back to Walter's question, how do you capitalize on time? Part of it is honoring time, but part of it is I'm talking about right now is making the time meaningful so that when it ends, people are glad that they were active, that they were participants. So what I used to do foolishly, normally, typically, is I spend a whole lot of time planning how my meeting was going to start. What's the agenda? What's going to happen? What treats are we going to have for people to eat? Who's going to come in and, great.
right,
So I'd spend 90% of my time planning the first 5, 10 minutes. And then the end was, hey, thank you for coming. Well,
right,
reading this book and writing the article, it occurred to me that when people think about the meetings we've had, what they're going to remember is not how great the beginning was. They're going to think about consciously, subconsciously how we ended.
yeah,
And so what I began doing, and I probably did this the last year or two, that I was leading my school, and I often do it when I'm teaching my classes now at University of Missouri St. Louis. I should do it every time. Now that I'm talking to you, I think I need to do better. But what I will plan is so that 5 minutes, 7 minutes before the meeting should end, before people leave, I will end the meeting and I will say, okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. Before we leave the room, what I want you to do, turn groups of two or three. What did
yeah,
you learn today?
yeah,
What did you hear that's useful to you?
yeah,
Uh, how can what you heard today be helpful to you tomorrow? And what that does is a couple things. One is it focuses people on what they heard, what was useful. It leaves them, if you will, with some information that's going to be valuable. The other thing is it makes a good use of their time because it reminds them of what was important. If I don't do that, human nature being human nature, the last 5 to 7 minutes, they're thinking about what they need to do at dinner tonight, what they
yeah,
need to do this evening, what they need to do tomorrow. So I've reframed that, if you will. And I
yeah,
think that makes the time more effective, even though it's the same number of minutes,
yeah,
because I've made the meaning more meaningful for them.
yes, absolutely. I'm thinking back to an author interview I did with Eric Gerson Kessler. He's out in Boulder, Colorado, and works with immigrant families. And he was talking about communication in terms of how different cultures work differently and so communicate differently. And he gave examples like, for a lot of us, we may reach out to parents, we just think email's immediate and easy, so we use email. But in some cultures, he's learned that having their phone number handy and texting them will get a much quicker response from a parent and a positive response because that's how they communicate on the fly. Then we have these portals, these parent portals that school districts now have where they can log in anytime, look up information, communicate that way with the district. How much do you think all these different modalities of communication are in play with this? Everything all the wisdom you're imparting is, and it is wisdom, don't try to take it back, is very interpersonal, and you reference it as common sense a lot. But yet it's about our knowing as people and relating as people. But we have this whole technological revolution going on around us that never seems to stop. Every time we think
Right.
we know the newest and greatest, there's something. Now AI is in play. Um, any any thoughts to share on that and how all of these tools are just continually driving us and probably making us less thoughtful about how we communicate?
Yeah, I think that's very insightful on your part, Walter. And I think everything that your guest said about different cultures, about technology, that's all true. But let me add a small piece to it. To me, and I'm not a high tech guy, so somebody may say, Tom, you've missed this one. But to me, we do an even better job than we ever did of communicating to families. Two's underlined there. I'm old enough. Some people are going to wonder, what is he talking about? The first parent letters that I sent were on mimeograph paper,
Yep.
and we moved to Xerox, and I finally ended with digital and
Yeah.
photos and the whole nine yards. But I was communicating to, and so often I think we can focus on doing a better job of two without considering that good communication, by definition, is always, always, always two-way. We need to
Right.
figure out how to do from. So, for example, this is a minor thing, and maybe all of your listeners, your school leaders do this, but my guess is they don't. I would do, as probably they do, parent surveys often. I did a big spring survey every year, but I would often in my weekly letters ask specific questions so I
Mhm.
could get feedback as we were going along. One of the things that I did, and I don't know of anybody else, if they've done this, I'd love to hear if they did, could send me an email, they can send you and you can forward it to me, is in my spring parent letter, I would often ask all these questions. And I would say things like, and I asked about me, has Tom been supportive and helpful? That was my question. They didn't know about my curricular knowledge, my staff supervision. I'd ask that. I would ask a question, has your child's individual needs been met? Have they
Mhm.
been met? I would ask those kinds of things. And then, so there would be a Likert scale, strongly agree, agree, disagree, da, da. Then the next question is to say, please explain. Okay, this so far here, there's nothing profound. This is the kind of thing we would find everywhere.
Yeah.
But the last question in my survey would always say, as you saw, this was an anonymous survey, and I appreciate hearing from you. However, comma, I learn best when communication is two-way. If you're willing, please share your email address here so that I can get back with you.
Yeah.
Well, it was amazing, not surprising. I would bet more than 50% of the parents, even though the survey was anonymous,
Yeah.
gave me their email address. And
Yeah.
I knew enough to know that I needed to capitalize on that. Simply getting that wasn't enough. I needed to automatically send them, hey, thanks so much. And then take the time to find Walter. I appreciated your comment about or whatever. So that communication wasn't just basically them giving me information and me sitting on it. It was a back
Right.
and forth. So technology is wonderful. AI is going to change the world in which we live.
Yeah.
Some future point, probably not as far ahead as I think. The school AI is going to be talking to the parent AI, and that's a whole
Right.
other ballgame. But right now, we need to be talking about communication by definition, if it's effective, has to be two-way, has to be two-way. So when we're thinking about that, whether it's part of PD, parent-teacher conferences, or whatever, we need to be building in ways where parents are comfortable sharing with us. And that comfort might be emailing, it might be texting, it might be that, once a month we have coffee and we're just there in the morning. Come on in, I want to hear what you're thinking about. Or
Yeah.
we have something in the afternoon, parents can just drop in. It might even be, depending on the community in which you work, that you don't do that at your school. You do it at a local library.
Right.
Maybe there's a library that geographically is in a different part of the region that you're sharing. It
Yep.
may be that for some parents, coming to that library is better, or maybe you even kick it up and you find a coffee shop and you say, can I have this corner? Again, for some of
Yeah.
your parents, coming to a coffee shop at 4:30 in the afternoon and sitting as a group of 8 or 10 is
Yeah.
much more comfortable, much more likely to happen than coming and walking up those steps to a school, or maybe they attended 30 years ago and didn't have a great experience.
Great examples again. I appreciate this. And today's generation, and we're a couple of veterans talking, so I'll put an asterisk by that saying, uh, people 40 and under, just for the sake of the conversation. They very much they when they think about communication and listening and being received and the two-way interchange exchange, they're very much looking for the results of the communication. Did something actually happen? Is there going to be a change, no matter how small, and sometimes very large scale, but is my feedback actually being received, or is this just pleasantries and
And Walter, let me interrupt here. Don't lose your
yeah,
place, but I'm going to pick up on that exactly. So
yeah,
I've talked about parent surveys a minute ago, and I do this in my class too at the university. The other part about parent surveys is if you're giving out a survey, whether it's a survey to staff, a survey to the community or whatever, you
yeah,
then need to follow up with here's what I heard and here's what I'm going to do about it. And so what I would do every year, I did my spring survey in April or May, and every year then in late August or September, I would say, hey, thanks to the 64% of you who completed the parent survey, da, da, da. And I would
yeah,
say, I heard a number of things that were positive. I appreciate that. I heard some things that were concerning. While it's often difficult, I appreciate that too. Let me
yeah.
tell you three things I'm going to be doing this year based on what I heard. Now, I don't tell them everything I'm doing. I may not go into a lot of detail,
Well,
but that
yeah,
validates them. That says to them, hey, he really read that survey. And
yes,
that completes that loop. And then maybe if I'm really smart and if my memory allows me, in
yep,
February, I say, thinking ahead to the survey beginning in a couple months, I'm reminded how when I started the school year, one of the things I worked on was dismissal because you talked about it in last year's survey.
yeah.
Thanks, and I look forward to hearing what you say this year. Building that loop that I'm really listening. This isn't just an academic exercise.
Exactly. And it takes the idea of authenticity to a whole new level
Yep,
because they're
yep.
seeing results. It's wonderful stuff. So we live in such a tumultuous time, and the principles of SEL that you've been expounding so wonderfully here are so important. So talk to us about the new EDD in character development, social emotional learning, and leadership that you're going to be launching at the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Well, it's really exciting. I left New City School 10 years ago, and people say to my wife, how is Tom enjoying retirement?" He says, "Tom has failed at retirement."
Right.
Um, not unlike you. I found something that's fun and it's exciting teaching at the university.
Yeah.
I've been working for 10 years in the principal preparation program, and I'm good at that because I can talk about all the things I did wrong that they shouldn't do, and it's fun. And so Dr. Mindy Beer and I, who's a colleague, she
Yes.
run the Center for Character and Citizenship at the University of Missouri St. Louis, has been talking, she and I have been talking for probably 4 or 5 years about a need to have a doctoral program that
Yeah.
focuses specifically on character development, social emotional learning, and leadership. How these
Yeah.
three things come together. And so
Yeah.
we're launching this program in January 2026. It's all virtual, synchronous. So you
Great.
can enroll if you're in Alaska. We've got actually some people from the Bahamas who are going to be enrolling. Uh,
Wonderful.
Teaching in a different cohort now at the university. And there
Yeah.
are folks from Colombia, South America, from
Yeah.
Malaysia. So it's going to be a program. It's a 3-year program. They will wind up with a doctorate. And
Yeah.
look, what I say to people who are interested in hearing about this, and it's a small program. Our cohort is going to be 15 to 18. We're probably about half filled already.
Yeah.
Is we're going to focus on people who are very pragmatic, because the
Yeah.
keystone in any dissertation, I'm sorry, in any doctorate, is your dissertation, and we want to make sure that that dissertation is meaningful. What
Yeah.
what what sings to your heart? What do you want to learn about, and what do you want to become the expert? And then we work with these people on helping them design a dissertation that's going to move them the next step forward. I've been working at the university already in 2 previous doctoral cohorts,
Yeah.
and it's fun. These are good young talented people. I learn from them as much as they learn from me. So I'm
Yes.
excited about this new program because
Yeah.
it's going to be making a difference in the world, and without being too much of a naysayer, the world needs more positive differences, believe me. And I think this will be a step in that direction.
Amen. And for all of you listening, if you'd like to learn more, both Tom and Mindy will be on a week from Friday, April 18th in the afternoon to talk at length about the program. So you're invited to join us. Tom, this is wonderful. It's always good to catch up with you, but I'm especially thrilled to share the gift that is Tom Hoerr with everyone listening. So thank you for making time this morning.
Well, Walter, I'm old enough that I've made a lot of mistakes and hopefully have learned from them. And it's always fun to talk with you. You continue to do your job in making the world better for everybody. So thanks for the opportunity. And thanks to everybody else for listening.